Today, we're cutting through the noise and getting straight to the heart of what really takes to drive innovation beyond just technology. If you're a CIO trying to move past buzzwords and actually create a culture of execution, this episode is for you. Our guest today is Renee Gregor. She spent over 15 years on the front lines of client strategy, working with some of the biggest brands out there: Macy's, BMW, Ralph Lauren, and Coca-Cola. The list goes on. But what makes Renee stand out isn't just her experience, it's her approach. She doesn't just talk transformation, she builds it. She partners with organizations to go beyond the tech, starting with why and making strategy come to life. She's now Chief Operating Officer at ParkPro. So if you're looking for real, tactical insights on digital transformation and business evolution and how to get buy-in at every level of your organization, stay locked in. This is going to be a conversation packed with hard-hitting insights, practical advice, and the kind of expertise you won't get anywhere else. So let's get into it. Renee, welcome to Heartbeat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Renee, the market has shifted quite a bit over the years. What are some of the things that you have seen, and tell us more about your role as COO?
Yeah, it's funny because I wish I could say that there were things that were just mind-blowing that we're seeing for the first time, but that's not the case. We've seen these things. Mike, you and I have worked together. So some of these things are like, are we having deja vu? And now it's execution. So now we're talking about more leveraging better technology, AI, to do execution better, faster, stronger. At ParkPro, looking at operations on all fronts, it's taking a startup and taking all of the lessons learned with all of the big brands that I've worked with, where they struggled or where we got stuck in the trenches, where a 5-month implementation turned into a year or 10-year implementation, and taking the lessons learned from that and applying it in the startup world. And so that's where I'm excited to have conversations with you today, because I've had several aha moments that I was like, man, if we would have just done this one thing or just brought this other person into the meeting, or maybe not had a meeting, maybe put an execution document together, maybe we would have gotten a lot farther faster.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that mindset a little bit of corporate versus a startup mindset, because they are fundamentally different. And I feel if we don't take a solid look on how those two can cross over, we can go down rabbit holes very quickly. So how should one navigate a point of view from a cultural and operational divide to mitigate these challenges?
One of the things that stands out to me in conversations that I've had just recently is the rigid process that exists in our businesses that you and I used to work with and that you still work with, that are built at scale, are not addressing or attempting to look at their processes that are in place. And so we come at it from a great idea or a great blueprint that our consultants bring to us, and we sit down and we've got a lot of man hours. If we looked at how many hours were spent sitting around the table strategizing and doing the ideation, it would rack up. Our ROI would be pretty diminished on the execution because we've spent a lot of time on that front end. But what we didn't do and continue to fail to do is to engage that process and look at ways that maybe that process needs to change or that infrastructure needs to change. I relied heavily on our CIOs to bring them into the platform selection process when working with our clients. And so it was CIOs, CTOs, this is a platform we're recommending. Does it make sense? Can it scale? Is it agile enough for your business? And the answer is most times, yes. And so we took that and we tried to fit it right down into their existing process. And what we kept bumping into was, that's not how we do it here. And so we create a number first, and then we send it to accounting, and then accounting does this. And by the time we've gone through that process to fit into existing infrastructure, we've lost the say of the question we were trying to solve, or what we were trying to solve in the beginning. And some of the lessons learned in that mindset shift for me is to ask what's needed if this were to change, instead of coming out with the grand parade of here's how we're going to change it and here's how we're going to make your business better. That's important too. Who do we need to get involved in infrastructure and process change? And especially with tools that we have at our fingertips today, where we can cultivate that data to really show, is that process working as well as you think it is today?
And so talking about process and really taking a legacy approach of how things are done, it's a challenge that we've oftentimes run into, which is taking an old way of doing things, the whole lift and shift, which is I'm going to take my old process, my old way of thinking, and apply it to new technology versus leveraging out of the box best practices of what others have done successfully in changing your business process to map to those best practices. Can you speak to, based on your experience, which model you think is the best for a company to be able to grow and scale?
This feels like a trick question, and I like it. Isn't that what we do with AI? Isn't AI combing data and combing the best practices and combing those things to give us to surface up? These are the 5 best choices for you. It is situational, Mike, in my opinion, meaning there is not a one size fits all. We used to say back in our consulting days of let's do a lift and shift because it felt easier for the client and it felt like more palatable. People could wrap their heads around that we're not starting something new because that's scary, or we're not ripping out a process because, oh my gosh, Joan in the accounting department spent so much time on that. So we don't want to mess with that. So leave that there. Or this group only does development hours. They're our DevOps team and we can't use them any differently. So I would say that yes, lift and shift does work. I rely on that expertise like yourself to tell me if that's the best use of that time. But I don't think we should be afraid of rip and replace, because at the speed that we're the speed of need, that's what we have to do. So yeah, I'm a little torn. I don't have a definitive, and it's not a consulting answer I'm giving you. It's more of yeah, sometimes I think we have to break that mindset a little bit to really evaluate the problem we're solving. And that goes back to that why. I know I'm the consummate 3-year-old in the room when I go, hey, I'm sorry, remind me why we're doing this again. And everybody go, oh my gosh, Renee, why? It's on every statement of work. It's on every, and I'm like, I know, but is it evolving? Is the why evolving? And when the why evolves, the execution evolves. And I think a lot of great ideas die on the vine, or a lot of great ideas end up very watered down by the time we get out of execution and delivery. And that's where I spent the majority of my career, is in that execution on the ground delivery. And then someone would say, oh yeah, why were we doing that again? Or why did we do this? And so, yeah, a couple different ways to look at it, I suppose.
I feel like a big missing piece that we oftentimes forget to bring to the discussion is taking a look at the company's culture. And I say this because the Department of Taxation for the state of Ohio might have a different understanding of digital transformation than Amazon. And goes back to an actual real life use case where the Department of Taxation thought digital transformation was going from 3 pieces of carbon copy paper to 2. Whereas Amazon saw digital transformation is making 100 changes in production or to production every single day. And many of those failing, but they failed forward. And their culture was, it's okay to break things, learn from it, and move quickly. And that's how we're going to win. When you're speaking to the whole lift and shift versus rip and replace, how much does culture apply and how much does culture influence that decision?
Huge. I think culture impacts that decision greatly. I think I've had the opportunity to work with some chief digital officers who start at culture first. They have a roadmap in their mind and they have an idea, but they know they're not going to get there without bringing the company with them and really in investing in understanding the current culture, understanding what that impact's going to be on that specific department. We start with the business owners who say, I've got a problem, and we bring in consultants and we bring in folks that are going to solve that problem. And then we don't take a look at how it impacts the rest of the organization, or how these great ideas are going to impact the rest of the organization. And so this culture, this willingness to change, and I love that you stated fail forward and have that moment where it's okay, because unfortunately we've gotten in that mindset that it is not okay to fail. It is not okay to pivot. It is not okay to take a step back, and all the buzzwords that we've used in meetings, right? When we need, let's pivot away from this. Why don't we put a pin in that and come back to it? And I love that that's how you started this conversation, because here at ParkPro, joining a startup for me, we made a joke. It was almost like the swear jar. Anytime I would use any of my corporate jargon or corporate lingo, they would ping me and say, all right, Renee, put $1 in the bucket. because I wasn't executing on anything. I wasn't bringing in new ideas. It was filler words for me to figure out what their culture was and figure out what direction we needed to go. As a COO, looking at every part of the business, sometimes I relied on that culture that I was used to, which is let's appease them. Let's just get them to the next stage. Can we just get this PowerPoint put together so that I can tell the story? And it's really been a mind shift for me and an understanding of the culture to go, okay, so they're ready to move at the speed of need. In trucking and logistics, you can imagine you and I talked about that Kodak moment where it was like Kodak and iPhone. And for us in transportation, that speed of need, we're going through that. They are ready to have those innovative ideas, but understanding the culture of our clients and our constituents and folks that we deal with was key. And I had to gear up pretty quickly. I didn't have a luxury of time to jump right into the execution. I really had to understand the culture.
Based on your understanding, and there may be some who are not aware of this, but what is the Kodak moment? What did Kodak do or not do that led to where they're at today?
You can add color to this because I found it to be interesting that you brought it up because I've read it in so many white papers and it's that innovator's dilemma, right? What happens and why do we stop? Why do we just go to market with one angle? And that was Kodak, right? It was, we're going to create film and that's it. And then here comes the digital age and they're not a player. I bought my godson a Kodak camera. And when I got a Kodak camera, when I was graduating college, that was a big deal. And he was like, oh, Aunt Renee, I just wanted a new iPhone because on my iPhone, I can do all of these things with it. So I'm interested in your take on that because you must run into that story, or at least that story must play through your mind all the time.
So my understanding with the Kodak story is they had the R&D division who developed the first digital camera. And they did not bring it to market because it would essentially cannibalize their business. They would make their money from selling film and developing film, and the camera was just a vehicle for them to sell their consumables. And by bringing out a digital camera would pretty much be writing their own ticket to insignificance. But what happened is another innovation came out, and I don't actually think it was the iPhone that caused the massive shift in how people took pictures. And I say that because you could take digital pictures, whether it was on a BlackBerry or even on one of those original Nokia phones. I feel like the disruption really came in bringing two technologies together that by themselves would not be great, but together blew up and created a brand new market. And that was Instagram. It made it so easy to take a picture and then to share it and build a community and to build a feeling of connectedness by using the technology that Kodak was not able to participate in because they did not have the platform. And I think that's where a significant shift is taking place, where instead of it being in control of the entire thing, there are companies that manage infrastructure. There's companies that build apps, and those companies that I believe are going to be implementing the systems or the enablement layer for those others to be able to take advantage and to be successful as well. Your organization with this startup mindset, where would you say you fit into this ecosystem?
We definitely are a disruptor in that. And I keep pulling Jim Collins' Good to Great off my shelf all the time to remind me and to have it in my conversations for do what you do and do it great. Don't try to spread it out. And so for us, being a connector, creating a network of folks that have and connecting them with the folks that need at its very simplest form. If our CEO and owner was on the call, he'd say, oh, there's a better way to pitch that. There's a better way to pitch ParkPro. But I'll tell you, the reason I joined ParkPro is because of that very simple need. Why are we doing this? Why are we building a digital reservation system? There is already digital reservation systems. There's your Park Mobiles. There's tons of parking reservation systems. How are we different? How are we going to be different in that space? And when I took my eye off of we're creating a digital parking reservation platform, when I took a step back a little bit and was like, no, I'm creating a connectedness, a connected tissue, a network, if you will, for those that have unused parking spaces, whether it be malls or arenas or stadiums on their hours not in operation, with carriers that have drivers that are needing parking spaces. They're 98% of the truck drivers on the road are needing parking. There is that much demand for getting our men and women into a safe, lit parking space. And it was just like one of those no-brainers when you hear it and you go, how come we're not already doing this? Why is because we're focused on what we do and just will cannibalize the market, as you mentioned, right? We're partnering with Department of Transportation because we're not taking over what they're doing. We're not going to take dollars away from what they're doing. We're going to provide a stopgap so that they're able to do it better, gather data of where trucks need to park. They've got, what they say is they've got projects at the moment that are slated to be completed in 2035 and 2045, creating 200 spaces and 400 spaces. That's great, Mike. But what's happening today? Days, not decades. And so it's one of those things to me that it fit perfectly in my experience working on these large scale implementations that would take us years to replicate within the business and to push out, especially some of the e-commerce platforms, and how long it took us, and some of the lessons learned, which was, analysis paralysis of, well, that business does it this way, but if they did it this way, we could get there faster. But let's not disrupt that process. Let's work around the process. And sometimes I think challenging that process and being bold enough to say the outcome we're trying to achieve, and the outcome in 2035 for 200 parking spaces is great. But what if I did things differently today and I could triple, quadruple that number leading up to that?
And it feels like you're connecting pieces that on their own have value, but you're bringing them together in such a way that they are amplified. And looking at what the DOT has, I believe, mandated, where you can no longer drive a truck for 24 hours straight.
That's right.
Even if it's switching out drivers, you need to actually put that vehicle to sleep, so to speak, and have designated areas for there to be crew rest. And being in an area where there's two giant corridors of traffic, there's a lot of truck stops, but what about all the other places where there isn't?
That's
So
right.
you are not only fulfilling a need from the driver's point of view, but you're also meeting the need of the legislation that's come out of this isn't an option.
That's right.
And so it's a sweet spot for you to be because you're not creating the demand.
That's right. And the hours of service and compliance is a huge safety issue, right? It's why it exists. And so our partnership with Department of Transportation's nationwide and having a seat at the table is not only educating our technologists that I've brought on board, but also the community of these retail property management groups that go, oh, I had no idea. I just thought they were a nuisance because they were parking in my parking lot. And it was like, no, they actually have to. They're mandated to. They'll get fined if they don't. And it was, again, a two-way market street. What can we provide here that would satisfy the need for our retail spaces to maximize on that space that's unused during those hours when they're not in operation? And how can we support these carriers to get them where they need to be, not only safer, but faster? Mike, we're geared to really have some impact in the supply chain of planning and integration with those route planning systems that exist in trucking and logistics today. And you and I used to always talk about this. We don't integrate for integration's sake. Somebody was telling me about, oh, does it have an API? And I laughed and I said, what do you want to do with it? Just because it has one doesn't mean that we should plug into it. Coming into the system is probably not as useful as you think it is. What are you going to do with it? So that goes back to that engaging other parts of the business to, if we surface this data up, if you're able to see this data in real time, would it help you achieve the ultimate goal, ultimate results?
Oh, those are very insightful. Thank you for that. You and I come from a world of consulting, and I truly believe that the consulting world is broken. Sometimes you need to bring outside counsel, and you need to bring someone who has a fresh pair of eyes to see the situation. And if someone has done it before, they may be able to get there a lot faster just because they've got muscle memory. When I say the consulting industry is broken, how do you interpret that?
My first instinct is to say that you and I are part of the same club. I think we have the same invisible tattoo. If we all got together, we'd have to show it and say we're one. We believe it's broken too. I think about this a lot with our owner. He's an entrepreneur. Trey Williams has written a book called Boss Brain, and it's one of those that when I read it, I had that moment where I was like, oh, someone taught me to be an employee. This is not how I think. I don't get up in the morning just naturally. I wouldn't have gotten up in the morning. And you pick up his book. It's interesting. But I think about consulting in that way. When you say consulting is broken, it's because someone told us focused on hours, util, billable. That's the foundation it's built on. And someone told us if we have that foundation, we have unlimited amount of resources that we can help our clients. So that's the importance. And when you and I got into it, I won't speak for you, but when I got into it, we'd have a great idea. We want to move this forward. And the business wasn't quite there. And all we were hearing from management was they need another bucket of hours, or you can't use that person because they don't have enough util on another. And it was like all of these buzzwords that were like, I'm sorry, can I ask you? Newell Rubbermaid would like to move this forward. We can move this forward for them. Why are you telling me we can't move this forward? Because we've got 4 people on the bench. Like, we just got lost in the administration of what we do and bringing the brightest minds to the table. But my first reaction when you say it's broken is absolutely. I can't bring to Trey, hey, I want to bring these guys in, and they are going to have 40 hours a month or 50 hours a month, and they're going to charge us X. I can't. I won't even entertain it. And at first I was a little insulted by it. I was like, that's how we work. It's how consultants work. Bring us in, give us a bucket of hours. Let us have our way. Let us do what we will. And the more that he and I have engaged, and the more that I'm understanding back to the culture of a startup, is I need execution. I need execution points. We don't need to plan for trucks to park. We need trucks to park. I don't need to plan infrastructure. We don't need to think about the best ways. And I need trucks to park tomorrow, Renee. And it was like, oh, I get it. Now it becomes a different conversation.
It's interesting you say that. When I hear of companies trying to solve problems, I see there being really 2 bookends. The first is go buy some software, go sign up a subscription and do it yourself, which is a scrappy way of starting, or leveraging some of those best practices of which Salesforce and other SaaS-based platforms fall into that category. Even an app on a phone falls into that category. You download, you execute, you take action on something. But if you want to do anything above and beyond, that's where it gets complicated.
Yep.
And on the other extreme, I think you have the traditional consulting world, which is a done for you model. And I think that is sometimes an option where it's going to get you there the fastest, but it is also the most expensive. And consulting firms, for the most part, are incentivized to never leave. So they're not going to really teach you how to do everything, because that would make them self-redundant, and that ruins up their util, their billing. And if you lost a big account because you solved the problem, you're going to get in trouble, or you're not going to be in business much longer.
That's right.
And so if you think of do it yourself, meaning software, done for you, which is the other bookend, which is where you hire a company come in and to do the work, I feel like there's a big piece in the middle where there's a significant opportunity, which is the done with you. And I really see that as more of a systems way of thinking versus an hourly or a product approach. Based on your experience, how can a systems thinking benefit the CIOs who are stuck between these 2 impossible situations where they need to solve the problem?
I think it goes back to an early part of our conversation, which was being comfortable with discomfort, being comfortable with this pivot, this mindset where, the model you're talking about in the middle, which I love, by the way, and can't wait to be a part of, in this service as a service, like really being service with you, really doing it collaboratively, allows them the opportunity to pivot, allows them opportunity to go through the different infrastructure that we talked about that could, if someone comes in and does it for you, they're just ramping up on your culture. They're just ramping up on your systems. They're just ramping up on what historically you've done as a company, the fails, the learns. If you go and try to do it yourself, there's this opportunity, a missed opportunity for innovation that maybe a company would bring because of their vast experience working with other companies, best practices, right? But this model that you're talking about in the middle is intriguing to me because, like I said, we're not talking about anything new, Mike. I think you said this how many years ago? 10? I won't date us, but I think it's been 10 years or so when you said, why don't we do this with this major CPG company out of Atlanta? Why don't we do this together? Why don't we walk through that model together? And so to me, it's the sweet spot that I think is resurfacing because we've got technology like AI that's been around. And now that it's gathered enough information and we're using it internally in our own systems, we're not using it as a magic wand or a guy behind a curtain, the magic wizard behind a curtain. We can use AI within our companies to surface data within our current systems. And someone like yourself being that conduit to work together with kind of serves the two ends of the spectrum.
I think in order to really implement those types of solutions, it's critical for companies to have clarity on where the problem is. And I feel that if you're in the business, it's hard to see where your own weak spots are. And sometimes it's hard to ask the question of, where do I need to improve? And I like to think of this as if you're sick, if you're really sick, you might go to the doctor's office. And the doctor may give you a prescription and you might take that prescription, but it doesn't really deal with the actual issue. And in a consulting world, we used to call those blueprints. So you go in and the client would share and you would discover what the problem is, but you would take a very standard approach, a very cookie cutter approach, because it typically would be a small engagement. And your goal was to uncover all these other problems that had very big dollar amounts to it, because that would be a win because it'd be more hours.
For sure.
Whereas if you were to come in and do more of a deeper dive, I call it a business MRI, of coming in and looking at all the attributes of the business and truly getting an accurate picture of what the problem is, I feel that if you took systems thinking to this and you looked at it as pieces of Lego, your system that you need might be a unique system, but the pieces that make up the system can be plug and play. You mentioned AI a few seconds ago. AI is changing every week, but there's a good chance that someone has a piece of what you need. So instead of going to create it yourself, why wouldn't you take the piece and plug it into the system and let the system deliver to you the outcome you're looking for? And if that piece no longer works in the future, you replace the piece, but you're not replacing the system. And I feel like it's such a critical component of what companies are failing to see right now is there's so many expectations of what needs to be done. But I feel like it goes back to, I need to go buy something out of the box. I need to buy a solution, or I need to hire a consulting company to come and fix it for me. But there's no middle ground of, let's focus on building the system and seeing how we can build the system together, internal, external skill sets, internal, external tools, and create room for that opportunity for innovation to take place and allow for that ability to fail forward. Because if it's something that doesn't work, you replace the piece. You're not replacing the overall system. Do you think that's an approach that companies would be open to, or do you think they're going to go, it's so foreign to how I work, I don't want to even consider it? What would be your take?
Yeah, I think it's in the approach, right? It's in telling that story. To me, as listeners are hearing you tell that story in the way you did, it wove it together in a way that's, okay, if we try this and it doesn't work, we'll try something else. What's the worst, Mike? Us continuing to build with the wrong Legos and then ending up with something, I don't know about you, but again, my godchildren love Legos, and I look at the diagram and I'm like, let's just figure it out. And when it doesn't look like a dinosaur, I am quickly told that is not the right pieces. We have to start over. And I think breaking it down to some of those simplest terms is an easier conversation to have. But one better, let me offer one better. Let's use AI for AI good. Let's start talking about how much time we're wasting trying to fit new ideas and innovation into old systems. Let's start talking about how much time it took us in prepping or getting a meeting together, and then how long it took us to implement. Because I would love some of that data from past implementations that you and I were on to tell me when we started and when we actually finished, and then all the meetings or roadblocks in between. Let's start using AI for AI good. And if we need to convince our business owners, need to convince the powers that be, if you will, to take a chance and take that Lego piece and put it in to see if it works, let's give them some hard data, because that's what everybody responds to. Anecdotally, I respond to your story because I'm a right brain person and I am very visual and love to paint the picture for me. Where are we? But I think one better is take an analytical approach to it and say, all right, we just finished that implementation. It took us 7 years. The ROI is watered down. We went through 7 teams, 2 consultants, whatever the data is. If you need to provide historical data to get the point across, I don't like the definition of insanity. Every time I hear it, I just cringe, because I go, don't do it again. What can I learn from this to not do it again? And what you're offering them is an opportunity to find that out in the moment, as opposed to waiting through a painstaking implementation that hurts your business and ultimately creates no return on investment.
And you talked about the need to have that insight. AI is it's a game-changing technology if you have the fundamentals in place.
Sure.
And there's a lot of individuals that are talking about agentic AI, or being able to use AI to do some of the simple tasks like customer service or outbound sales and business development reps, where I don't know if it's legal to call people anymore with AI because of how good it's getting. I think that was squashed by the trade or the communications organization because it was fooling too many people. But I feel that if you don't have those fundamentals in place, you need to go back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And far too often, I'm hearing companies that are trying to skip to the end game without doing some of the groundwork. Based on your experience in the startup world, how important is it to have sound data that you can base your decisions off of versus gut feeling? Because you're at the ground level and you might have a better understanding.
Extremely important. In the startup world, it is the goal to revenue positive, right? Every day is a day you're not bringing in revenue if you're just beginning and just starting. And so there are some things that historically I would have built into a robust technical roadmap with our development team and would have pushed for us to move forward with. And let's get that bucket of hours and let's start working on this. And what I had to learn really quickly was you're only as good as the data that's there. You don't really have a lot to work with. It's malleable clay at the moment, right? We can make it what we want it to make it. And my success is not high-end, robust parking reservation system, right? My success is based on my carriers, my drivers, getting to where they need to be faster, safer. It's for my host to optimize this new stream of revenue in a way that provides them infrastructure that doesn't interrupt their business. And so for me, taking stock in what do we have today? What is the data telling us today? We don't have any data. Okay, let's go get that data. Let's get users in the system. Let's truly spend time. It's that discipline. You talked about it, some folks wanting to jump to the end, to rush to the finish line. And what do you produce? You produce just shiny app. And I don't know about you, when I first started, when we finished that first implementation, I was like, took a deep breath. And I was like, we did it. And now 20 something years later, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just the beginning. Like standing it up was nothing. I remember when we did the quick out of the box Salesforce implementations. Remember, those were really big, where we could say, we could stand this up in 2 months. And it was like, sure, but what's in it? What does it do? It doesn't do anything. It's a beautiful car with no engine in it. You don't even know how fast you need to go. And now we take a step back and go, do you want it hybrid? How far are you going? Now we've got a lot of endpoints, data points to look at. But it's extremely important for startups to take that into consideration and not try to jump ahead. And to me, if consultants are working with startups, some boutique firms are working with startups to get them going, you can't have the same mindset, right? And come in with a $15,000 a month, a bucket of hours, because that means nothing. You put holes in that bucket because that's what's happening. The water's coming out of those bucket of hours. We don't even know how we want to use those hours. And unless you're built to be flexible, to roll some of those hours over into innovation. But even then I hesitate because I'm coming from that place of execution. You'll hear me slip back into our old corporate speak from my recent startup introduction over the past 9 months. And it is discipline. I have to stay disciplined when someone asks me, can we do this? And my first answer before would have been yes, or yes, let's look at it. And now I go, why? What? How? Just very simply.
So you're coming from the corporate world and you're coming to the world of startups. I'd like to hear you share what are some of the things that you feel you can bring from your corporate into the startup world, and then from the other side, what can someone who comes from the world of a startup bring into the enterprise world?
If we go one direction from corporate into startup, what I can bring or what I felt has been of use to me would be the experience with some of these large enterprise organizations, global enterprise organizations, and working with multiple areas of business. In a startup, sometimes you are party of one or party of two or party of five, and you live in that box. And so for me to be able to call on, whether it be recollection of experience from the folks that sat in our governance office or the folks that sat in our PMO or even down to sales. And again, telling that story, bringing the questions to ask. And it's a little bit of that discipline. Sometimes startups like to be scrappy. I remember starting with a PowerPoint and being like, okay, here's our biweekly meetings. And everybody was like, what's happening? Are we really looking at a PowerPoint? I was like, sorry, guys, it's the only way I know how to speak. It's the only way my brain knows how to condense information is 3 bullets on a screen. But the more that we've done that, the more that I've heard that that's helpful, because everybody else can be glued in, and we know what our end goal is. We start with the why, and then we say, we're going to spend 10 minutes on this and our outcome is going to be this, and let's move on. And so that was maybe some of those things from corporate when we'd sit in those meetings and we'd finish the meeting and someone would go, what's happening now? Or what did anybody take notes? And what's the follow-ups? And some people just get up and leave. And the next Tuesday you sit in that same meeting and you talk about the same things. And it just becomes like a tribal diary entry as opposed to execution. So that coming from corporate into startup has helped me, pulling from experiences in different departments, understanding wants and needs, and how that can impact our business. And then I think talking to my colleagues now, I tell them, I'm like, don't plan to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a listening ear for a girlfriend of mine who's the woes and trials and tribulations of this meeting led to this meeting and then this person. I'm like, just call that person up and say, what do we need to do to get this done? And as simple as that sounds, we just don't do it because we manage up or we manage out, and we want to respect. And I'm not suggesting that we take any of that respect away from folks in their roles. There are people that produce and there are people that process, and both of those roles are equally important in business. But I think what we've done is we're undermining the people that process because we're not engaging them into the conversation because it's not built into our corporate structure. When really, if we just said, what do we need to do to execute? If every conversation is, what are we executing on? You'll find it hard. Even if you just tried it tomorrow, spend every meeting on Monday and say, out of this meeting, what are we going to do?
And I think that's where some of these new AI tools really become powerful, is you can have them act and transcribe and actually come up with action steps of what needs to be done and then schedule those follow-on activities. So you're taking that process, which some people just don't think logically through to what those need to be, and you can actually take those steps. And I feel that one piece that startups do really well that doesn't happen so well in corporate that you just said is they're really good at shipping. Because sometimes it might be version 1 and it might absolutely stink, but they're not going to find out if it's going to get any traction unless they get it into someone's hands, a customer's hands.
That's right.
And the motivation is if they don't get this to market quickly, they will die. Whereas in corporate world, the less you ship, sometimes the more protected you are because you've never done anything wrong. And I feel like that's a way of thinking that doesn't land too well. And I wonder, do you feel like there's a shift happening where people in corporate are now expecting there to be the same focus on shipping, even if it's not 100% correct, but get it out the door and iterate Or do you feel it's still the same of waterfall, let's make sure everything's perfect and wait for 3 years before we do anything? What's your take?
I feel like you're 50-50. I think the technologists who are really leaning in to see the power of what AI can truly do for us and machine learning are getting more comfortable with not perfection, more data, not perfection. Just get me data about what this does. There's a chief digital officer at Coca-Cola, and I think about her all the time because she says perfect will kill us. If we strive for perfection, we are going to die on the vine. We're going to be already 20 years behind.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get it out and let's start trying it. I think it's going to continue to push us because it's going to happen so fast. And I know colleagues now that are using AI tools to generate reports, and they're doing it like they have a conversation with their manager, and then the next day they present their manager with this report of, hey, here's what we could try based on this. And the manager goes, wow, that's impressive. And they're like, okay, so can we do it? And they're like, normally the managers, maybe they would forget about it, or maybe next quarter we'll look at it. So it's going to force those that think differently, having the tools that are at our disposal, being able to produce more of that failability. Let's fail. What's the worst? Let's happen. But I think you're 50-50. I don't think that I see the shift. It's inevitable. We can't keep doing the same things and expecting different results, right? I think it's inevitable.
To wrap things up, what would you give CIOs or COOs in your role? What would you give them for a start-stop list in 2025?
Ooh. Start failing. That's what I would say. Start failing, start trying, and just embrace it. Just start embracing this mindset of that's how I'm going to move faster, is if I start taking stuff out of this car. If I start taking stuff off this boat, it's going to go faster. It's a sailboat. It's meant to sail.
Yeah.
If you're a captain of industry and you're in that boat, start taking stuff out. Just start purging, start getting rid of things that are useless, start getting rid of meetings that are useless. I got to tell you, that's the one thing in my new life that I am refreshed by, is getting rid of those things that were just a line item that we had to do because it was a checkpoint. So that's what I'd start doing. It's funny because I seem like both. I feel like you'd stop and start. I'd start doing more of that, and I would stop. What would I stop for folks coming in, for my CIOs? I'd stop letting other people schedule your meetings and really be vested in what meetings are happening so that you can have an actionable seat at the table. Look at your calendar, prioritize things. If it's a new idea, sit in on it. Don't let someone tell you, oh, we'll bring you in at the end. Stop letting somebody else rule your calendar so that you're not involved early on in some of these ideas, even if it's just to sit time. We used to say, we don't want to engage them too soon because we're ironing out some things. But what we talked about at the beginning of the hour was the fact that sometimes existing process and infrastructure gets in the way of these ideas really becoming something because we don't want to change, or we don't give the luxury. And I'll tell you that it's our CIOs, our CTOs that probably don't get a luxury to be a part of the beginning of the conversation, so they could say, hey, you know what? We actually don't need a PO for that. We actually can change that and make that happen tomorrow. And so if someone else is managing their calendar, and that seems pretty silly, but if someone else is managing their time and they're not vested in what meetings are taking place around them, then they'll be the roadblock at the end when they had no intention to be the roadblock. It's just how it's coming to them in third hand. So I don't know if those stops and starts are good, but
I'm just going to add my own opinion. I think people should stop going to meetings if they're not adding value.
oh, that's big. That's big.
And if you're on a call and you're not contributing and it's not going to need your help, leave.
Yeah. Is that the Jeff Bezos?
Sure is.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think my CEO, our owner, takes that to heart. Sometimes it'll just be like, and he's out. I'm like, oh, and he's, oh, I didn't think you needed me. You're good. So it will be a difference for people to get used to, but I like that. I like
It'd
that.
be a lot easier doing a Zoom call than it would be in the middle of a meeting if you're sitting at the front of the table to just get up and leave. But I understand the value behind it.
Exactly.
Renee, this has been so good. And thank you so much for all of your insights. You've been just a gift of actionable steps. And I just want to say thank you for joining us today on Heartbeat. And I look forward to staying in touch and hearing more of your success.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for what you're doing in the community. It's really great to have these conversations.
My pleasure.